The Sahara conjures up many images in the minds of Westerners. Endless sand dunes stretching into oblivion, howling desert winds, and camel caravans laden with exotic goods. Few, however, would expect there to be a thriving ancient civilization in the middle of the world's largest desert. Yet that is exactly what one extraordinary people, the Garamantes, were able to accomplish. Located in the southwestern corner of what is now the nation of Libya, the Garamantes inhabited an area known since antiquity as the Fazan, a term meaning rough rocks in Berber languages. Though this name might denote a harsh, unforgiving landscape, this area was not always so hostile to human habitation. Rather, the entire Sahara was much wetter in prehistory and hosted a series of large inland water bodies, including Lake Megachad, the world's largest freshwater body in the world at its peak, sometime around 5000 BC. This green Sahara provided ample grazing lands for animals in the early to middle Holocene period, allowing both hunter-gatherers and pastoralists to exploit the landscape. The hydrology of the Sahara began to steeply decline approximately 5,000 years ago, forcing local peoples to adapt. Though animal husbandry didn't vanish, the primacy of pastoralism in the Garamantian heartland, which rock art has established evidence for stretching back to the 7th millennium BC, eventually gave way to irrigated agriculture in the 1st millennium BC. The first traces of this transition can be located near the hill fort of Zinchera, a naturally well-protected site overlooking what would become the central node of Garamantian settlement, the Wadi al-Ajal. A wadi, meaning valley in Arabic, is simply a dried-out streambed, and were no doubt attracted to these newly made farmers due to their proximity to the water table. Garamantian settlements are clustered around these areas and include the aforementioned Wadi al-Ajal, Wadi ash-Shati, Wadi ash-Sharkiyat, Wadi Hikmah, and finally Wadi Tanazuft. These narrow valleys were squeezed tightly on one side by rugged, steep escarpments that led up to rocky plateaus known as hamadas. Encroaching on the other side were towering ergs, the sand seas captured in popular imagination of the Sahara. These ergs, chiefly the Edahan Ubari and Edahan Marzouk, dominated the majority of Garamantian territory. In this unforgiving land, with its scorching heat and parsimonious humidity, one might wonder how these people were able to make their desert bloom. Thanks to the fossil water stored in the adjacent escarpments during the wet period, the Garamantes were able to drill shafts into the hills below the water table and release these underground reservoirs into their fields. These shaft irrigation systems, known locally as fagaras and kanats elsewhere, were invented by the Persians and spread west, possibly from Achaemenid Egypt. These underground tunnels could measure up to 5 kilometers long and had ventilation and maintenance shafts spaced every 5 to 15 meters, crucial for maintaining water flow through the soft sands and gravels through which they plied. These ingenious systems, along with a number of wells, permitted a large population in a land otherwise denuded by the sun and sands of the Sahara, allowing the Garamantes to intensively cultivate wheat, grapes, figs, and dates in their narrow bands of fertile land. Perhaps reflecting a better security situation, the later, much larger Garamantian settlements transitioned from rugged hill forts to fortified cities within the wadis themselves. The largest of these settlements were the capital of Garama, as well as Qasr ash-Sharaba and Qasr Bendukba. These more urbane settlements contained stone-footed buildings with Greco-Roman colonnades, with evidence of a Roman-style bath even being found in Garama, dispelling the notion that the Garamantes were nothing more than a band of crude barbarian nomads. Despite this opulence, security was still a concern, and excavations have revealed that Qasr Bendukba was barricaded by a large mud brick wall, flanking towers, and a central citadel or qasr in Arabic. Dozens of these castles and fortifications have been found throughout the Wadi al-Ajal and surrounding areas. By the 5th century BC, the Garamantians had grown in size and influence, attracting the attention of no less than Herodotus of Halicarnassus, responsible for much of what we know about the Greco-Persian Wars and widely regarded as the father of history. In his histories, he describes the Garamantes as a strange race of farmers and pastoralists with backward grazing cattle. Avoiding contact with all others, he states that they possess no weapons and can't defend themselves, though contradicting himself later by noting that they hunted swift-footed, cave-dwelling Ethiopians with 4-horse chariots, perhaps a reference to slave raiding. Herodotus' fanciful description highlights the tenuous reliability of outside sources on the Garamantes, which is only reinforced by biases against what were considered uncivilized people at the time. A quick review of Garamantian search terms in a classics database reveals a disparaging perception. Descriptions of them as being savage, miserable, innumerable, and unmastered leave one feeling that contemporaries were more ignorant of these mysterious peoples than even ourselves. We are given no names of the Garamantian leaders from the sources, only that they were ruled by kings, one of which apparently fought his way back from exile with an army of 200 dogs, according to Pliny. Though poorly understood by their more civilized neighbors, the Garamantes were integrated into the wider Mediterranean world through trade connections, first with the Carthaginians and then the Romans. As a hardy people accustomed to the harsh environment of the desert, they excelled at facilitating the trans-Saharan trade, as is testified by the presence of Roman goods along the Niger River. They would trade salt with the sub-Saharan Africans in exchange for slaves, which were in turn brought north to trade with the Romans for wine, oils, glassware, and ceramics. In addition to the slave trade, the Garamantes worked and exported semi-precious stones, including red carnelian and amazonite, the latter being mined in the Tibesti Mountains of contemporary Chad, far away from their own homeland. Trade was not the only way Romans interacted with their Saharan neighbors, however, and raiding by the Garamantes into Roman North Africa became a perennial issue, forcing the Romans to counter with their first trans-Saharan expedition, led by Cornelius Balbus in 19 BC. Balbus, a Romanized Carthaginian and veteran of Caesar's army, conquered the Garamantes and crossed the entire Sahara, all the way into the Niger River, before returning to cheering crowds and a massive triumph in Rome. The expedition of Balbus would not be the last Roman expedition into the Sahara, nor their final clash with the Garamantes, and a series of forts were constructed on the Roman frontier to keep the raiders at bay. Despite this antipathy, the two continued to trade, which perhaps led to economic dependence, as Garamantian decline is closely related to the foundering and later collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Archaeologists have noted a decrease in quantity and quality of Roman goods in the Fezzan after the crisis of the 3rd century, which could have subsequently impacted Garamantian trade with sub-Saharan Africa and limited their ability to procure the slaves needed to maintain the Fagaras, possibly sealing their fate. With their labor-intensive irrigation features either silting up from lack of maintenance or slowing to a trickle due to the exhaustion of fossil water, the Garamantians were on borrowed time. To complicate things, fortifications increased in later antiquity, suggesting a negative change in the security situation in the Fezzan from the more opulent 1st and 2nd centuries. We hear little of the Garamantes in post-Roman times, only that they converted to Christianity in 569 AD. A final coup de grace was delivered in the year 666 to 667 when an Arab Muslim general named Uqba bin Nafi defeated a king of the Garamantes with a squadron of only 400 cavalrymen, indicating that the desert kingdom must have considerably declined in both power and influence. After this incident, the Garamantes fade into the sands of history, leaving scholars only ruins to sift through and ponder the rise and fall of this ingenuitive yet mysterious desert civilization.